Welcome back, everyone. Please go ahead and take your seats as we get started with the next session of our program. I'm Vern Hawkins. I'm the president of Syngenta Crop Protection. I also am serving as the chairman of the CropLife Board of Directors. And I'd like to start by really thanking the CropLife America board members and membership at large that are here for their commitment to openness and transparency. We think that's a really important part of the contribution that we make. And we've done this national policy conference for about 5 years now in an effort to promote more understanding between the many of us that are connected to the business of food. As you know, our theme is the devolution of agriculture, and I've been connected to agriculture myself most of my life, and certainly have witnessed many of the changes in agriculture. If we look at the last couple of decades, there certainly has been significant change that most of us can connect to. Productivity, in terms of the amount of output that we're able to produce from a crop on a particular piece of land, quality of food, and even international trade. But there are differing points of views, different convictions, and this is something that we need to bring out in the open. We need to talk about, understand the different points of view and how to bring them together. Because the business of food is something that's growing in importance and in need. So taking care of business is the next session title. And we'd like to talk about the business of food because it is a big part of agriculture's story. I know, serving in my role with Syngenta, that much of what we do is about bringing technology to our farmers to help them bring a better quality product, bring more yield, so we can feed more people and provide more benefits and quality of life. And it's important that as we take on the business of food, that we understand these differing points of views and the contributions that each of us that are connected to it in our own way are making and need. So you heard this morning from a group of people that were pretty close to the production of food and certainly understand that side of the equation very well. And we're going to move up a level and talk a different part of the chain and begin to try to understand how we connect with something that started as an idea and became a large business. And we're pleased to have with us today Honest Tea, who has a fantastic story, which I think you will enjoy. And it's really about us trying to understand how what started out as an idea about a desirable, organic, sustainable beverage evolving into a large business and having a connection with consumers, which was really a movement in the way that it evolved. And we'd like to specifically understand how Honest Tea was able to make that transition from an idea to a large business and have a connection with the consumer. So I'm pleased to invite Marc Gunther to the stage to lead this session. Many of you may know Marc from previous national policy conferences, and he certainly has a wealth of knowledge and participation in writing and editing and sustainability, business, and I would like to invite you, Marc, to lead the session.
Seth, come on up. Thank you, Vern. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to CropLife for having me back again. This has become an annual event on my calendar and something I look forward to all the time. And it's great to have Seth Goldman from Honest Tea here. I'll give Seth his full introduction in a moment, but before we do that, let's take a look at the film that gives you a little bit of insight into Honest Tea, its mission, its connection to farmers. This was footage was filmed during a recent trip that Seth took, I guess, to a sugarcane farm in Paraguay. So can we roll the Honest Tea film?
I had an easy part, thank you.
We had a lot of goals when we launched Honest Tea. The first was to bring a low-calorie drink to market and make it widely
Hey,
available.
Justin, I forgot. He's going to want this.
But another was to find ways to help connect people more closely to the natural world and to support ecosystems that are really under threat. So we're in Paraguay, which is the world's largest producer of organic cane sugar. We've come here to gain a fuller appreciation of the communities and the ecosystem that help us bring this crop to market. It goes over my shoulder. Like that. I like to get my hands dirty, literally. I mean, obviously, I'm not working 8 hours a day like these workers are in the field, but it helps make sure that I never take for granted all that's involved in getting these products out of the earth and getting them into a bottle of tea. Sugarcane is a vital part of the Paraguayan economy. And each year, more farmers are making the switch to organic. It starts from the ground up, with natural fertilizers cultivated in this compost field, and continues in the lab, where these researchers are developing alternatives to chemical pesticides by breeding tiny wasps to control cane worms. It's all part of our commitment to sustainable agriculture and growing communities. When we can see a school like this that really is supported by our commitment to organic and fair trade, that really makes a material difference in this community.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
Every time we buy a pound of fair trade sugar, a portion of our purchase goes back to the farmers. And sometimes these premiums are used to buy ambulances and modern farm equipment that helps the farmers increase yields. And sometimes they go to help community members who need an extra hand.
They have a small plantation of cane, organic cane.
This is the original house that this family lived in, and it's a very basic construction, literally sticks and mud and a dirt floor. But they've been working in this field for 60 years, and so what's nice now is that the cooperative provided them with came and built a house for them. You know, it's so easy when you see a product on the shelf to just be disconnected not only from the earth and the ecosystem it comes from, but also from the people involved. At the end of the day, making a better product is about more than just better taste. It's also about long-term investments in the environment, the farmers, and their communities.
So join me in welcoming Seth. So before I give you your formal introduction, where else have you been in the supply chain? What other places? I'm sure you've been to some tea estates as well.
Been to India, where we get most of our black tea, China, where we get most of our green tea, Sri Lanka, where we have been looking at sourcing some tea. We don't yet buy any. South Africa, where we buy our red or rooibos and honeybush tea. And then early on, visited with the Native American Crow community, where we source peppermint, organic peppermint from.
Cool. So, as you heard, Seth is president and TeaEO of Honest Tea. He started the company in 1998 with Barry Nailbuff, who was his professor at the Yale School of Organization and Management. Before that, Seth did his undergrad work at Harvard. He lived and worked in both China and Russia. He worked at Calvert in marketing, the socially responsible investment firm here in Bethesda, where both Seth and I live. More impressive than any of that, and any of you who, like me and Seth, are runners, will appreciate this. He was a sub-3-hour marathoner in his younger days. And one more thing, as Vern said, Seth and Barry are co-authors along with an artist named Sung Young Choi of a graphic book, a very readable and useful and fun book about the company, aptly named Mission in a Bottle. So let's start at the beginning, Seth. Why did you start Honest Tea? What problem were you trying to solve?
You know, I was an entrepreneur in search of an opportunity, really, and I had in business school come up with a business plan around a diagnostic that we won the Yale university-wide competition, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. So I was just waiting for sort of the right idea to hit me. And I was working with Calvert. I had gone for a run in Central Park after presentation to some institutional investors. And after the run, I was thirsty, and I went to a beverage cooler, and I said, I was with a friend, an old teammate, and I said, "There's nothing in this cooler for me." He says, "Well, what do you mean? There's hundreds of options. They're all different colors, and all different flavors and names." I said, "Yeah, but they're all the same sweetness level, either 100 calories or 0, and nothing with just natural ingredients." And so that, I said, this is a problem. I recall that when I was Barry's student, we had studied the beverage industry, and we had agreed this was what was missing. At the time, like a lot of classroom discussions, it didn't lead to anything. So I got back in touch with Barry, and I said, "I think I am ready to do something about this now." And it made sense from I think of myself as an activist, so it made sense as an activist, because here's a nutritional opportunity. And initially we didn't have, it wasn't like we're gonna make all this organic from the start, but we knew when we could start with tea, and Barry came up with the name Honest Tea that helped connect the dots, that was an automatic platform to do something that could be natural. And with given the name, we'd be able to embed this commitment and build on it.
So it was a taste opportunity,
Yeah.
a health opportunity, and I guess just because of who you are, you wanted environmental.
Well, the other thing was just having been a runner, I was always thirsty.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I personally knew that was an idea I was passionate about, that I could get excited about, and that turned out to be really important as it grew.
I was going to ask you why not Powerade, your sister beverage at Coke, but maybe we won't go there quite yet.
Well, part of it was a natural, wanting to really make sure this product could be natural. And also that, could it perform and work well with minimal calories, right? And so the main antithesis when we started was a product like Snapple, which at the time, 100 calories per serving. And I used to try to drink it, and I said, this is just too sweet. There's really nothing else like that.
So your business plan, the original one from December 1998, is on the Honest Tea website. It's a quite interesting reading, fairly prescient in terms of describing what happened. But I want to read one section which you call Statement and Aspirations for Social Responsibility in the original business plan for investors. And you write, "Not only is the value of our brand based on authenticity, integrity, and purity, but our management team is committed to those values as well. We will never claim to be a perfect company, but we will address difficult issues and strive to be honest about our ability or inability to resolve them." So you were from the beginning trying to position yourself as different from what we might think of as the conventional beverage industry, true?
For sure.
And why?
Well, one of the things we learned very early on, and we kind of internalized it, but we actually did do a focus group, probably one of the only ones we've done in our history, but we got a bunch of people in a room, and we wanted to hear what they thought of the beverage industry. And they didn't know, obviously, Honest Tea didn't exist, so of course they didn't know about it. And what we heard was so much distrust. And it wasn't just about the beverage industry, it was about food companies and big companies in general. And this was, remember back now, 1997, so that was a time when people were selling drinks that were gonna cure your memory and renew your sex drive and, fight cancer. And so they would just say, they're all selling the same crap. This is the words of the focus group. I'm not trying to, and they're all promising things that they know they can't achieve. And so I don't trust any of them. And so for us, that statement that you read, one of the key words was strive. We never wanted to say, and the only way to really be honest is to under-promise, right? As soon as you say you're perfect. So for us, strive is always a word. It's sort of at the center of anything we do. We'll never talk about perfection. We'll never talk about social responsibility as a state to be achieved, but as a process. So we're always striving for social responsibility. We're never going to achieve it.
Actually, that's a very good setup. Is the other video, you talked about distrust of the big food industry, and I think we have a video with some man in the street comments about big ag or big food. Could we take a look at that now? And so it seems to me you're appealing to the consumers who have these concerns about health, about whether the big food and big agriculture companies have their interests at heart. What did you do in terms of building your brand and building your company to say, we're different, you can trust us, we're going to listen to you?
Well, certainly the idea of transparency is better be at the core of our brand, right? We call ourselves Honest Tea. We better be able to let people know where the product is coming from. And I think the other thing that we did was we never wanted people just to take our word for it. So we don't want to just say, oh, take our word from it. It's coming from good farms. We're treating workers well. We're treating the earth well. As soon as there was a federal standard, even before there was a federal standard for organic, we went and got certified. As soon as we could obtain enough fair trade certified ingredients to really be able to reliably supply us at a decent price point with the right quality, we moved to fair trade certification. So those are, for us, the optics are really important. We never, and I, as a consumer myself, I don't want to ever rely on a corporation's word for it. I really want a third party standard. So for us, that's really been at the core of our ability to be transparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the reason the word organic doesn't appear much in that original business plan is the organic standards had not been ratified.
There were state and local standards, but there also wasn't a supply chain. So in the beginning, all we had was organic sugar as an ingredient, but there wasn't enough organic tea. There was organic tea grown, but not enough to reliably source it. And so in 1999, we brought out the world's first organic certified bottled tea. And that was a peppermint, that herbal tea we sourced. And then as we grew, it wasn't until 2004 we were able to make everything certified organic.
So if you look at the label here, you do see fair trade, you do see organic, so you have the third-party certification, you do see a list of ingredients that are all quite familiar to anyone and easy to pronounce. And the other interesting thing you see on there is a little note, I think on every bottle,
yes,
signed by Seth and Barry.
That's right.
So as folks here know, you're part of the Coca-Cola company. Muhtar Kent doesn't sign the bottles, you do. But why have you, what was the thinking behind putting your name right on the bottle?
That's a good point. So there too, we really want to make it, there are real people behind this. There is a real story and there was real thought put into it. And so we wanted people to understand what we put it, why we created this, why we developed the flavors, and Barry and I still do write the label language, and within our history, it is easily the most contentious moments of the business when we had disagreements around label language. But that also is another authentic way, and it is authentic, And what's kind of interesting, one of the brands that I would say we're kind of opposition to, and it is a Coca-Cola brand, or I should say former Coca-Cola brand, is Fruitopia. If you recall that brand, it was literally a synthetic brand. It was sort of pseudo-consciousness. It was created as a brand designed to seem conscious, but in fact it was, the result of focus groups and, labs and I don't know. So in a way, we're kind of an anti-Fruitopia, right? That we were a real, and so, another thing in the beginning, especially because our filtration system wasn't very good, we always used to have a lot of tea sediment in the bottom. And in the first years, there was as much as 1.5 inches, and people would ask me, well, am I supposed to chew that? Or so we weren't supposed to have that much, but that people never mistook that there was real tea in it. Yes. And of course, the other thing we learned is we looked at the bottled tea industry. Most bottled tea isn't really brewed tea. It's powder or syrup. So if anything, we were over-authentic, maybe a little too authentic
with the tea leaves in the bottom. So I wonder if there's a lesson there for the larger agricultural companies, because one thing that consumers do seem at least interested in to a degree is connecting their food to the source. Mm-hmm. So I'm not suggesting that with, the CropLife companies are not going to put their name on their products because they're essentially, the CEO's name, they're B2B products.
Yeah.
But might it make sense for a Kraft or a Kellogg CEO to come out in the old Lee Iacocca style and say, I'm the CEO of Kraft, here's what we make, here's why we do it, and here's why we believe in it?
Well, I would go even a step beyond that. I wouldn't be as interested in hearing, if I'm a consumer, the kind of consumer I am, I wouldn't necessarily want to hear from a corporate person at Kraft. I'd want to hear from a farmer who's growing the ingredient that Kraft buys.
Yeah.
And then that'll help consumers appreciate this isn't a food that starts in a factory. It starts in a field, and it goes through a factory to get to the consumer. But to help people appreciate, even, go to corn chips. There is a corn farmer somewhere, and ideally when you can show what it means to this farmer, and it's very likely this isn't a farmer who's first, time at it, it's first generation, so help people appreciate this is a product of the land, a product a series of families that are committed to it. I think that would be a nice way to get to the consumer and help them. And frankly, as I think you heard it in the last panel, people are so disconnected from the land. You know, anything we can do to get people to appreciate what we're actually consuming is a good thing.
I'm going to open, I have a lot more questions, but I want to get you all involved soon. So if you have any questions, please be ready after this one here. Again, thinking about the opportunities for the larger, both agricultural and food companies to communicate their benefits to consumers. Do you think people appreciate maybe this is just too much to ask, the benefits of scale? You and I have talked about how as Honest Tea has gotten bigger, you've been able to cultivate, support more organic acreage.
Absolutely.
Your costs are probably more manageable now that you're, not bringing the bottles around in your station wagon anymore as you did in the beginning.
Yeah.
Is that a message that the larger farmers, the larger food companies can contribute, or is that something that consumers
Well, I think
are indifferent to?
I'm personally interested in destroying the myth. I mean, there's a false, it was sort of set up, there was a series of articles in the New York Times Magazine where they used to bash big organic.
Right.
And organic's never about small scale. In my view, it shouldn't be about small scale. So what people would say is, these people claim they're organic, but then they source from large farms. Well, there's nothing in the definition of organic that prohibits a large-scale farm. There's certain requirements about land use and sort of not letting the land heal and come back. But there's nothing there that says you can't have a large farm. And certainly, as we saw in Paraguay, I mean, sugar is you have to have these mills that are very large investments. So there's no way you can not have large-scale projects to develop it. So I personally am not against, big ag, as we heard in the video, has a negative connotation to it, but I'm not against big organic ag. I'm obviously an advocate for it and do want to see it grow to scale. And just to talk about numbers, before Coke invested in 2008, we were buying about 800,000 pounds of organic ingredients. This year we'll buy over 8 million pounds.
Wow.
So we are absolutely excited and plan to continue to push to expand organic acreage.
So 10x growth since 2008.
And we're this year up over 50%. So it's more growth still to come.
You've grown by 50% this year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's funny. Here we are 16 years into the business. We're not in this isn't a pipeline fill. We're just seeing great growth opportunities.
Go ahead, Ali.
Marc, I got a question for Seth. To Ted's earlier question when the panel was on earlier, the first panel, Ted was curious, and he said, look, it's an elitist conversation to have here in the United States about our, peculiarities about agriculture because we're all in pretty good shape. We do well, we yield well, we're prosperous. Americans are not short of food, as Megan said. The part of your business that is involved in both the fair trade and the sourcing of tea in places of the world, to Ted's earlier question, is that the best way to lift those people up, or is a technology transfer the best way to lift those people up? And how much does that influence your thinking about Honest Tea?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there. Let me see what I can get to it. So number one, one of the questions that sort of it relates is organic, people will often say is too expensive. And I think one of the things I heard in that video, what people distrust about big ag, is that some food is too cheap. And in a way, what we do with organic and fair trade is we're basically embedding the externalities, whether it's environmental externalities or labor externalities, into our price. So there aren't any there's no sort of cheap elements to what we sell. And yet in the marketplace, our price is 10 to 20% of a premium. From what I've seen, to address the issue of is this the best way to help these communities? Well, I think certainly in India, economic opportunity. We source some of the tea from southern India, which is actually much more prosperous than the north. And what's happening is that the workers in our tea gardens, because they are so well educated, the children are moving off the land. And I visited one of the schools and I asked how many of you, what do you want to do? I want to be an engineer and move to Bangalore. I want to be a computer designer. And so how many of you want to stay in the tea garden? Not a hand went up, not even to sort of be in management. So in a way, we are almost educating our selves out of a workforce, and there will be some changes. But what is happening, I don't say fortunately, but the North is poor enough that they're still migrating down. So there's no question, to really uplift an economic standard, I mean, to a higher level, you'll move to the city, but we all know that's, someone's still got to provide food. Tea is a hand-picked item. It's one of the few, items that literally is still hand-picked. So it's likely it'll evolve toward a more mechanized. They're starting to use shears now that cut the tea. Instead of hand by hand, they'll pick up a bunch at once. It's evolving, but I think fair trade is, to be realistic, we're not able to be in these gardens all the time. So it is the best proxy we have for a representation about the labor standards. And just to explain for people who don't know, fair trade means that there is an inspection of working standards, making sure they're paid a living wage, a wage that is above International Labor Organization standards. A portion of the sales goes back to these communities to be invested in a way that the community identifies as meaningful to them. So as you saw in the video, in Paraguay, they chose to invest in ambulances because they're far from any healthcare source, in modern farm equipment. But in India, we've done investments in computer learning centers. So children in a tea village, fourth generation children of tea pickers can actually have access to the internet and to computers. And then, or as you saw, also they might build a house, basically their own create a pension, because there is no state pension system.
And it seems like the extra few pennies that the consumer pays, or it might be a quarter, whatever it is here,
pennies.
Can go a fair way once you translate it into a poor country, in a
With
sense.
tea, at least, here's where it makes sense. This is a crop that is
We'll go to your question.
grown in the poorest parts of the world. That's a fact. And it's a crop that costs, when I go to talk to a restaurant chain, as I've been doing recently, and say, this is literally, so you're paying maybe 2 cents for your tea brewed on the premises. For 2.5 cents, you can put up signage and representations that the workers are being paid the right. When you're going back to think last year what happened with Apple, a high premium brand with some accusations about exploiting labor,
Right.
What chain wouldn't want to be able to have that kind of protection?
So you'd like to get a brewed version of this into some restaurants?
It already is, yeah.
It already
yeah.
is, yeah. Please.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Seth. I'm Cindy Baker-Smith with American Vanguard Corporation. And we are a basic manufacturer of pesticides, both conventional and organic. So we do both. And this conversation that we have about big agriculture and corporations is perplexing to me. So I'd be curious, Seth, to get your insights, because I think that people and corporations are still people, right? We're people who live in, we live in agricultural communities. So, I walk canals where my product is getting sprayed, on the lettuce, or I go to the strawberry field that's less than 10 miles from my house where some are organic and some are conventional. I raise my daughter in an agricultural community. So, we care about the environment, we care about, the water, we care about the people and the workers, just like you do, but yet I seem to hear all this, because we're in a corporation, somehow we're just about money, or we don't have an understanding about the food and the safety of the food. Is there insights or advice you can give us about those kinds of things?
I can share my perception. It's not fact-based, but going back to sugar as a good example, I think the undercurrent I heard in those comments was people didn't trust big ag because they're basically, the motivation is to buy things as cheaply as possible. So think about a commodity economy. And so what you saw in Paraguay is this is a community that has built a way to sell a product to not be a commodity. That basically they get enough of a premium because of the way they sell it that they're able to invest in the school or do these other investments. What's interesting is 2 weeks after I was in Paraguay, I went to the Dominican Republic for my son's baseball. But there I saw a whole town that had basically been decimated because they didn't have that hedge. They didn't have that premium. And when the sugar price sort of swung against them, the mill closed, the whole town was out of work. And so that was a good reflection of a commodity-based economy with no cushion. So what I heard these folks saying was, Big ag is about squeezing as much sort of getting a price as cheaply as they can. Now, you would also hear the consumers, we know consumers buy cheaper products when they can. So that's already sort of, there's a contradiction in the thinking, but that's at least sort of what I hear saying. So I think to the extent agriculture as a whole can help people appreciate that we aren't just an extractive. Think about one of the criminal companies with bad images is the petroleum, the extractive industries. And think about how can we make it clear that agriculture is not an extractive industry. We're not all about just getting the cheapest product, using scale to get the cheapest price possible. So how are we reinvesting in communities? What I showed in Paraguay is obviously a little bit different, but what could we say about the United States that we're doing in the same way? How are we reinvesting in not just the people, but in the land? How are we?
But you again talk sustainability. There was a 6th generation cattle rancher on the panel just before we came up. I think that is a story that the agriculture industry has, for whatever reason, not done a very good job of communicating to people.
Yeah, I think it's telling the story because I think there's a lot of corporations. There's certainly a lot of farmers that I know, big or small, because they come in all different sizes and with different things, who do give back to their communities as well. Investing in schools, investing in hospitals, investing in setting aside land, for bee habitat. Some of those are corporations. Some of those are individuals. Some of them are farmers. So I guess it's telling the story, right?
It might almost be interesting to go backwards. We all drive by, or at least when you drive out, especially in the Midwest, you'll drive by fields and you see corn or whatever. It might be interesting to see signage on the field. This is corn being grown and then you see a packaged good. So going backwards.
Yeah, I think the connection is not one that most people make, obviously. Let's talk about Coca-Cola and Honest Tea.
Sure.
So, that was a kind of a big, traditional, conventional company, a smaller, by your definition or mine, an alternative or a different way of doing business. What did they bring to the party? What did you bring to their party? And then let's talk a little about where some tensions may have arisen along the way. So what were the happy parts of this marriage?
So in 2007, when we were growing quickly. We were the best-selling tea in the natural foods channel, seeing lots of interest from large retailers, but we couldn't deliver. Literally, we couldn't get to the stores. So Safeway would say, we want your product to be carried in all our stores. And I'd say, well, we've got distribution to cover the Mid-Atlantic and California. And they say, well, we've got Dominic's in Chicago and Tom Thumb in Texas. So when you get your map put together, let us know. We'll carry your product. And so we were at this sort of either inflection point or not. Do we try to take this national and scale it, or do we just stay niche in our natural channel? And we, as you probably can guess, felt this is an important mission to really make it effective. We've got to take it to scale. So we did need a partner, and we were approached by a lot of different companies. And for us, Coca-Cola made the most sense because for a few reasons. One, they had created a unit called Venturing and Emerging Brands, which was designed to invest in and build brands without necessarily taking them over. Two, we fit well into their portfolio. They didn't have an organic or a low-calorie or even much of a tea brand at the time. And then I think for me, what really sort of clinched the deal was they shared their philosophy of what they saw, why they were interested in this opportunity. And it was a pictograph where they talked about the mega trends towards health and wellness, environmental responsibility, and corporate social responsibility. They showed this small area of overlap. And they said, here in 2007, these are all emerging. And that area of overlap, that nexus, is an important area because 5 years from now, or 6 or 7 years from now, that's going to be a much more critical space, and that's going to be the standard for doing business. And so our investment in Honest Tea is an investment in that space. And so they became a minority investor, about 40% of the company in 2008, joined our board, and started to scale the brand. We started to get national distribution opportunities. And as a result, when they had the option to buy the company in 2011, we mutually agreed, hey, this is working, let's not mess this up. And so we kept the office in Bethesda. I'm still the TeaEO. We really didn't change much at all.
So they brought you distribution.
Yeah.
Did they bring you some other efficiencies in terms of packaging?
Yeah, our bottle price went down significantly. That was certainly the biggest, on the cost of goods side, the biggest help. And of course, when you're buying millions of bottles, if you can save 5 cents a bottle, that becomes real money pretty quickly.
And what you brought them was a business that's growing faster by leaps and bounds, it sounds like, than their overall business.
And in channels they weren't even selling, right?
I mean, they're not in Coca-Cola was not much in Whole Foods at that time.
Not much, yeah. And I would also say with credibility, we really were the first to organic in bottled tea, the first to fair trade in bottled tea, and so this wasn't just someone trying to retrofit. This was,
And so what about the points of tension or conflict that have come up?
Well, inevitably, when you have an entrepreneurial, mission-driven brand that's part of a large multinational, there's going to be, if there aren't moments where we disagree, then one of us isn't speaking their mind, and I know I'm going to speak my mind. So there were often times where we weren't necessarily on the same page, and whether it was some of the language we used, the marketing tactics we used, and basically, for the first 3 years, they were extremely deferential. They really were. They said, well, this is your brand. You've got to rely on your instincts. And frankly, we're minority shareholders, so we can't dictate to you anyway. And then after that, it was also, once they exercised, we all agreed it was working. So there's still some points, I would say my voice on political issues is a little more muted than it would be if I were a totally independent company. But other than that,
wasn't there an issue where you wanted to say either on the web or on the label that Honest Tea doesn't contain high fructose corn syrup?
that was with Honest Kids. So our Honest Kids drink pouches has on the front of the box, says no high fructose corn syrup.
And that's obviously a major ingredient for Coca-Cola.
That's right. And our contention was it was important to disclose this because it's a processed ingredient, and especially the shopper we were appealing to felt that was something they wanted to avoid. So they asked us to remove it, and we said, well, we don't want to remove it because it is important. And they said, well, it is your brand. In 2000, just last year, we kept it on the package, moved it to the side. The reason is because we switched the sweetener from organic cane sugar to organic white grape juice. And so instead of that message, we said now sweetened only with juice. So to me, it wasn't about high fructose corn syrup. It was that this was and we know it's been an extremely preferred ingredient, and so that line this year is up 43%. The whole category is down 6%.
Which category now?
Kids drink pouches.
Huh.
So it's just on fire, and yeah.
And what about, how do you navigate the GMO issue with Coke?
Yeah.
Because they're a contributor to the,
Yeah.
they have opposed the labeling initiatives. You have a non-GMO label on the bottle.
Well, we have everything organic. There's no GMOs in any organic ingredients. So that is a challenging one. I would say not even about the GMO issue specifically. It's really, to me, more about transparency. I just don't think any company these days wants to be perceived as being against a consumer's right to know. So I think, in the long term, a federal solution is what's going to make sense. And I think we all, even the activists, I think, know that. So these state-by-state initiatives aren't the long-term way to address it. In the short term, they're a way to raise awareness. So my hope is that, and I believe that we are it's going to be a long road, but I do think we're all on the path to a federal standard around GMO labeling. In the short term, though, it does put us in the bullseye for some of these activist groups that talk about Honest Tea being a traitor brand that should be boycotted. And I'm not afraid to go right at those groups because these are people, these used to be my people. And so there's a group called the Organic Consumers Association, and I put that in quotes because
Right,
this is
not consumers.
Well, they claim their goal is to have 15% of U.S. farmland be organic by 2015, next year. So currently 1%.
1%, yeah.
Yeah, 1%. So I say to them, well, look, I am growing tenfold our demand for organic acreage, and we're getting to scale. So that's my plan. What's your plan? How are you going to get there? And I have yet to hear any thoughtful strategy to get there.
I apologize, I didn't see you in the back of the room there. Please ask your question.
Yeah, no problem. Paul Winger, I'm a farmer from California, third generation. What my sons and I farm today, about 5 other farmers farmed 40 years ago. I can see in their future that either they're going to get bigger or they're going to have to get much smaller. So when we talk about big ag, I guess it's all relative. But it's very interesting when I see the term fair trade a lot, and I see some of the pictures from those areas where they do fair trade and having that third-party verifier. Where would you see the intersection of American agriculture if we were, say, 100 years ago, we had a fair trade third-party certifier versus cooperatives?
Yeah.
Because when you start thinking about cooperative buying, cooperative selling, and what has really allowed the smaller farmer to be able to live a lifestyle they want rather than somebody that says this is fair enough. And I think about when I go to Whole Foods and I see in the fish section, there's unsustainably caught wild fish that have a certain tag in them, and then there's unsustainably caught wild fish. But to solve your conscience, they pay a third party for that unsustainably caught wild fish, so you're okay buying and eating it. So I'm just wondering how you see the intersection between third-party verifiers, who we don't know who those folks are, and cooperatives.
That's a good question. Well, first of all, it's interesting, right? Of course, there isn't any fair trade standard in the United States, but there is this movement, for example, around tomatoes, to fair, and I know a lot of religious groups have gotten behind this idea, and I don't know if it's 1 cent per some kind of unit per pound paid toward tomatoes. So there's some of these efforts. The only part of your comment that I don't agree with was you said we don't know who these third-party verifiers are. I mean, in the beginning, there were lots of different third-party groups, and it isn't a federal standard, and there never will be a federal standard like there is for organic. But there are the parties. For example, we work with Fair Trade USA, and this is a group. I've known them since they started because we started at the same time. And these are groups that are very well connected to other NGOs around the world. So and they rely on some of these NGOs for their inspections. So it is
It's a credible organization.
It's credible. There's transparency. Any consumer has the ability to basically look at the paper trail, not just the inspection documents, but the financial payments flows. So when we make these payments to these gardens, there has to be transparency to it. So I do think there's some transparency. But you raise another point around cooperatives, which I think is, if more Americans understood how cooperatives work, I expect there would be a lot more support for it, because in a way it's, even though some cooperatives are big agricultural units, it is I think it would appeal to more Americans in understanding this is family owned or not family owned, but sort of partnership owned. It feels more egalitarian, and so we've certainly seen the folks in Wisconsin who run Organic Valley, which is a cooperative, really prosper. And they very much relied on a message of family farming and how they are able to support. So I do think there's power in a cooperative, and I think there's messaging work that's needed to get that out.
Go ahead.
Yes, hi, Mr. Goldman. My name is David Knowles. I'm with the Corn Refiners Association. Our industry.
Speak up just a bit, please.
Our industry makes high fructose corn syrup. Just want to. Right. From a scientific standpoint, and there's no debate about this among credible scientists, there's no nutritional difference between sugar and high fructose corn syrup. It is no more processed than sugar. And unfortunately, the effect you're having by putting that on your label, it's not only misleading consumers, it's perpetuating myths and misunderstandings about agriculture and products derived from agriculture. Quite honestly, it's dishonest. Dishonesty. Sorry.
Wait a minute.
How do you reconcile
You can't
that?
make it in your house.
So I appreciate that, and I will say I'm not a scientist, so I'm not. This is what I said to Coca-Cola. I'm never going to argue. I mean, I'm personally not going to argue the nutritional difference between organic cane sugar and high fructose corn syrup. When we think about natural, and when I think about the natural foods marketplace, I believe the perception of high fructose corn syrup is that it is a more processed ingredient in the sense that it can't be replicated at home. You can't take corn home and make it into a sweetener that can be put right into a drink.
Same can be said for sugar cane or sugar beet. And you're right about perception. And
Right.
it's very unfortunate that the same unfortunate misperceptions about added sugars overall.
So I think there.
Can I ask? Can I ask you just a-
So I'm sorry, just if I can, the misperceptions, I think it's unfortunately what you're doing with that labeling is contributing to those misperceptions.
But see, our part of what we do is to provide consumers what they're looking for. And so we know, consumers were looking for they were looking to avoid a certain ingredient, and so we were providing that information.
There's more I could say about that. I don't want to take up our time, so maybe I'll have a chance to speak
Can I
with
just ask you a
separately.
quick
Thanks.
question? Obviously, correlation is not causation, but certainly I've read articles saying, the obesity rise coincided with the dramatic rise in consumption of high fructose corn syrup. Your argument is they're not connected to one another. All calories are the same.
Right, and if you look at the increase in calories, since people like to start with 1970, during that time, 450 some calories average daily per capita consumption is increased. About 7% of those are added sugar, account for added sugars. The rest is fats and other calories. So it's most definitely a misperception. Like you said, you can correlate anything, and that's being done in articles that you're reading, unfortunately.
Oh, here's one from Twitter, and then we'll go back to the folks in the room. What influence on the market do you think Walmart will have moving into organic with the objective of dropping the price and increasing access? As you know, they recently bought sort of the defunct Wild Oats brand, and it's become a Walmart store brand in effect.
I'm very excited about it. We talk about this democratization of organics. We really believe, and we never set out to sell just healthy drinks to only healthy people. We really want to make this as available as we can. So when we can see as large a player as Walmart making this kind of commitment, what will happen is that certain agricultural providers will start the process. Is a 3-year process to convert their farmland to organic. So I think it's a very good thing. I'm sure in the short term there's going to be some strain on capacity, but in the long term it's going to lead to more capacity, lower prices for the commodities, as much as I said. But of course we all want to get this to scale. And so I think it's a good thing.
And Honest Tea today is in mass market outlets like 7-Eleven, Walmart, or
we're
not
starting. I mean, Target is actually our largest retailer. So
Bigger than Whole Foods now.
It is, yeah. But of course, Whole Foods is still very much in the center of our, growth.
Please.
My name is Carol Kokendorfer, and I work with a variety of consumer product companies and food companies on labeling issues. And I think one of the questions I'd like to ask you is, first and foremost, I totally agree with your whole approach to transparency, trust. We need to reinvent our communities and bring our companies and our people back into one organization, if you will. We've separated that. But that said, when you stop and look at a country, a region. In the United States, we have 300 million Americans, all with different informational needs. How do you decide which information goes on a label, particularly when your bottle is only 8 ounces big?
Well, that's a good, yeah. So first of all, of course, it's great to have as much depth as you can available, not all on the label, of course, but on the website. So on Honest Tea's website, we have a mission report that's in paper. It's about 20 pages. We recognize not only can we not put that on a label, most people actually don't want to read it, but we do want anyone who does want to get that information to be able to get it. And then one of the things we've done with our plastic bottles, because we couldn't fit as much on the label, we actually put information on the inside of our label as well. So there is more chance. I mean, this is, we want to make sure people have the ability to, if they want to get under the hood, we want to make sure they can. And so, and that said, we can't just flood them with information. So we think, what is important? What do they need to know? And then how do we sort of get them interested in learning more? And that's what our inside of the label messaging usually is about. But we also have to make this a marketable product, so it has to be fun, it has to be engaging, attractive, something that, one of the things that we do, which is totally irrelevant to the product itself, is that we put a quote on every package. It's like our little toy surprise inside. So our glass bottle, the quote is under the cap. On our plastic bottle it is on the inside of the label.
Huh.
And so it's just a way to.
So what's the quote?
So
there?
here it says, "Forgiveness does not change the past, but it does enlarge the future." Very nice.
Very nice.
So what does that do?
Like
How
a
is that related?
fortune cookie
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of a thing.
It's a fortune cookie, but it becomes part of your honest tea experience, and it's something that few other companies offer, and it's just part of the whole deal.
So since we touched a moment ago on the obesity issue, you did get involved when Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg in New York, tried to get rid of the big what? Cups, was
So
it?
this was ironic, right? So here I am, a health activist. We got into this for health reasons, and his proposed ban would have banned any package larger than 16 ounces. That was sweetened and had more than 25 calories per serving, per 8-ounce serving. So
wouldn't
as a result,
affect water. It would not affect water, but
no. But this bottle, which has 80 calories for the whole bottle, but is 16.9 ounces, would have been banned. This bottle, if it was Snap, this is the same Snapple bottle. If this had 240 calories, would have been allowed.
because it's a smaller amount.
16 ounce versus 16.9. Now this is 16.9 because it's 500 milliliters. We got the memo about everyone going metric, and apparently not everyone got that memo. So I, despite the fact that Mayor Bloomberg's been to our office in Bethesda, and I consider him an entrepreneur I admire, I said it is as the judge said, arbitrary and capricious. It isn't really a rational rule, and so I took a public stand on that, wrote something in the Wall Street Journal, and it got a lot of buzz. But I stand by it. And someone said, well, you should have mentioned that you were part of Coca-Cola when you read it, and when I wrote it, and I should have. But I would have written it if I was an independent company also.
Yeah, you were writing about honesty in this case, right?
Yeah.
So you're part of Coca-Cola. I forget now whether Odwalla is part of Pepsi or Coke. That's Coke.
Odwalla's Coke.
Naked Juice is Pepsi.
Yeah.
Kasha is
Kellogg's.
I mean, you can run down the whole list of the alternative brands are now part of the big brands. Not all, but many of them. Do you see are we moving to a place where sort of there's a blurring between kind of the I don't know how we want to describe them, the conscious brands. I'd hate to call the other ones the unconscious brands.
I'd say there's an upward migration, right? So we're going to be part of these large companies, and we're spreading our ethos, spreading our mindset and what we do, and the scale is spreading as well. And the fact is, these large companies, not just in this industry, in almost any industry, are quickly being, the whole landscape is shifting. And so for any large food company these days to stay where they are is going to mean decline.
And do you think, as a rule, the companies that we think of as the ones that grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, in your case, 90s, are they grabbing, generally speaking, more market share from the traditional companies?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Ben & Jerry's keeps growing.
Yeah. There's just a fragmentation going on. So it's anything perceived as sort of big and established is being challenged, and we see it across all sectors, right? I mean, it really is the case that so there's no question that's what's happening, and I think the key to me is, do you keep the innovation? Do you keep pushing the envelope? And one of the more interesting conversations I had just after we had done our deal, I literally within the weeks of announcing it, I sat down with Walter Robb, the CEO of Whole Foods. And I said to him, Walter, I just want to reassure you, nothing is going to change with what we're doing. And he said, that's exactly what I don't want to hear. What I really want to expect of you now is you need to take leadership. You need to push the envelope and keep innovating. And so we actually have our innovation accelerated after Coke invested.
We'll get to that in one sec, but let me take this question and then we'll wrap up.
Scott Rollins with Wilbur Ellis. You said you got into this because of health issues or health concerns. Do you believe conventional tea is unhealthy? And I have a follow-up. And the other, I think you said you buy 8 million pounds of organic cane sugar?
No, organic ingredients.
Organic ingredients. And can you give us 8 million pounds of organic ingredients, including the tea leaves themselves?
Sure.
Okay, so the world price for sugar right now conventional sugar is about 17 cents. Are you paying double that for sugar? And to be honest, if you were buying 8 million pounds of sugar, at 30 cents, that would be $2.4 million. That's not a lot of money. And I see that you say this is helping these farmers down in Paraguay buy these tractors and do lots of wonderful things in a line of 5 tractors, which would probably wipe out half of what you paid them. So I'm just curious, what is the fair trade price for sugar? Should it be double? Should it be triple? Where do you think it should be?
Okay. So the first question around the health issues, for me, it wasn't tea on its own that was unhealthy. It was all the sugar added to the tea. So at the time, back in 1998, really all the products on the market were 100 calories per 8-ounce tea. So that basically one bottle had the World Health Organization's recommended daily allowance of added sugar for a whole day in one bottle. And so you drink one bottle of that, you really aren't supposed to have any other added sugars. So we said, why can't there be a bottled tea that has either no sugar or 1 teaspoon per bottle, 2 teaspoons per bottle, even 3 or 4, but not necessarily 10. So that was the primary impetus of the health thing. And as we've expanded it to go to just to take it to kids, we have this Honest Kids drink that we brought out, which now is more than a third of our business. That was in reaction to Capri Sun, which had 100 calories per pouch. And that's more calories. It's a 6.75 ounce pouch, so it's more calories per ounce than you'd find in a can of soda. And so why should that be in a kid's drink? They bring the lunch. We put 40 calories in ours, and that business has exploded. To answer the question around pounds, so it's 8 million pounds of organic ingredients. It's roughly 3 million pounds of tea, hibiscus, non-sugar ingredients, roughly 5 million pounds of organic cane sugar. I was discouraged to hear you say the price because we're paying quite a bit more for organic. So we start with organic. I don't know the exact number, but it's definitely over 30 cents. Then the way fair trade sugar works is that per metric ton, there is an extra premium paid. And it's not a lot. It is, I don't have the exact amount, but it's less than $1 per extra metric ton. And then what happens is, but as those monies accumulate, it does become significant. Of course, we're not the only buyer. And so, when I was down in this garden, we're less than 5% of this community's demand for organic sugar. And we buy organic sugar from the United States as well. So it's not all exclusively fair trade, and we don't label it if it's not fair trade certified. But there is, I don't think it's fair to discount something just because it's small. It's meaningful, and obviously, when we factor it all together, it becomes certainly important to these communities. And I think, to me, one of the most compelling arguments for fair trade was when I went to the Dominican Republic a few weeks later, in organic, and I saw what happened when a community didn't have the ability to protect themselves from, price fluctuations and commodity squeezes.
So, last question, because I think we're just about out of time. Innovation. You're growing your tea business successfully. It sounds like the kids' business is really doing well. What are your plans for sort of expanding the Honest brand? Are you going to get into the actual food area?
Yeah, so a few things. Number one, we also just last year launched a line called Honest Fizz. It's a 0-calorie, naturally sweetened soda line. So it's sweetened with stevia and erythritol. And we have the first organic 0-calorie soda. And we're working on some other formulations.
Oh, and there's a lemonade product as well, right?
So we just launched, one of the reasons I went to Paraguay, because in Whole Foods we launched a line of lemonades sweetened with fair trade sugar. And that's exclusive to Whole Foods, and that business has grown quickly. But I would say that within the next 18 months, you will see products with the Honest brand on them that are not liquid. So I'll leave it at that, but obviously the brand it shouldn't just be about, certainly not just about tea, and it doesn't have to just be about a liquid beverage.
Cookies to go with the tea?
The idea that a lower calorie, organic, fair trade when possible brand really could apply to a lot of categories, and where there's opportunities where and not to use the word dishonest, but just where it's less nutritional than it could be.
We're out of time? Okay. Please join me in thanking Seth, first of all. Thank you so much. If you have not tried the tea, it really is good, so give it a try. And let me bring Allie back up to the stage.
All right. You guys hear me?
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you, guys. What a great
It's cool.
conversation. I know the story of Honest Tea so well, and yet every time I hear it, your enthusiasm comes by as if you invented it last week. And if you ever get a chance to meet the co-founder, Barry, you'll find a similar story. Two very different guys with a remarkable enthusiasm. I'm actually a big fan of Honest Fizz as well. I've started drinking that. I myself am not into just a little sweet tea, but I like your products. And it was a great discussion, and your questions were interesting. We touched on something that I'm going to pick up this afternoon in my panel with the journalists about perceptions. I want to go a little bit further with the high fructose corn syrup versus organic cane sugar or cane sugar, and I want you to think about that over lunch because I want you to come back. This is a much trickier conversation than the one we just had here. Is this about Seth and Honest Tea being misleading to perpetuate ongoing myths, or is it the corn industry not telling you everything that's out there in terms of scientific research, which I've read? So we had a conversation earlier this morning about people who are anti-science, and those of you in the corn business, get your questions ready because there are some people who seem to suggest some things that are anti-science. And I'll do my research, and you should all Google it, and you should pull up all the academic and scientific research on high fructose corn sugar and its effect on obesity and insulin and things like that. I'm definitely one of those guys who would pick the non-fructose, the non-high fructose corn syrup option. And I'm pretty well read on this, but I could be entirely wrong, and I could be perpetuating a myth. So let's actually have that discussion. Let's talk about it. And frankly, when you look at me, it's like I'm not sure I'd be following my example on anything. And I usually use the non-high fructose corn syrup drink to wash down the fried chicken. But I like the fact that we've got a bit of a discussion going on it. As to the earlier discussion, I understand that for some of you, we weren't breaking tremendous new ground in understanding the disconnect between your consumers and your producers. But in fact, we just continue to get more and more stats about the fact that, look, more of us are urbanizing, more of our suburban land is being developed. We live further and further from farms. Our farms are consolidating. My story on that self-milking cow thing the other day taught me that in 1960 we had 1.65 million dairy farms in the United States. We now have about 40,000 dairy farms in the United States, but we produce more milk. So, we have to think about all these things. And one of the reasons why we have fewer dairy farms, amongst other things, is consolidation and efficiencies, but labor difficulties. A smaller farm that otherwise wouldn't think of investing in this machinery and is fine getting up at dawn 7 days a week, understands that you just can't get the labor, so let's invest in the machinery. So it's important for us all to understand, particularly when we all live in a bubble, where we accept the fact that these are all important discussions and that we have them amongst ourselves and we all understand the terminology, that out there they don't. I believe most people don't. I believe most Americans don't really have a connection. I agree with Jesse that we're getting closer, that there might be a renaissance, that we're not getting dumber about food. And I think thanks to Honest Tea and thanks to those brands that you talked about, most of which are owned by major brands anyway, it may not be entirely accurate, but it's getting us toward thinking about things. It's getting parents thinking about their kids and their intake. And I think we're on the upswing now. I think we're getting better at this. So think about all of these things. When we come back from lunch, we're going to have a conversation with journalists. So earlier we talked about perceptions. We saw the videos about what people think. We talked to farmers. We talked to people involved about what should be done to cover this. Now you're going to talk to journalists who actually do cover it. And this is where the rubber hits the road. So you're going to have an opportunity. What I would like to see is get engaged and tell them, because you are not always going to have that opportunity to have people who make these decisions about how the story is conveyed to the public in front of you. So push back a little bit. Don't let us do all the talking. Come back. You know where the mics are. You know how to tweet us. You know how to email us. If you don't know how to tweet us, it's hashtag NPC14. Or you can email us at npc14@croplifeamerica.org. You can email over lunch, but eat your lunch and enjoy the people around you. What time should we reassemble here? At about 12:45? That makes sense? All right, so why don't we see you all back here at 12:45. We look forward to a few more panels this afternoon and some hearty discussion.